Could Tij Iginla be the ultimate, father, son draft pick for the Sharks?
You're Locked On Sharks, your daily podcast on the San Jose Sharks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome to Locked On Sharks, the premier hockey podcast covering your favorite team in the Bay Area. My name is JD Young, contributor at San Jose Hockey Now. I want to thank you for making Locked On Sharks your first listen, probably part of the Locked On Network. We cover your team every day. If you want to be an everyday, all you have to do is just follow wherever you get podcasts, or you can watch on YouTube as well. And today we have Derek, who's going to be making his Locked On Sharks debut, where we're going to talk about Tij Iginla. We're going to discuss his strengths, weaknesses, and get Derek's thought on the 2024 draft. So before we get to that, do want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right, and now we bring in Derek Neumeier of McKeen's Hockey. Derek making his first time appearance on Locked On Sharks. How's it going, buddy?
It's going really well. I'm excited to be here and to talk about the 2024 draft.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about one Tij Iginla. If you don't know Mr. Iginla, let's get you caught up. So Tij Iginla, of course, the son of a very famous Iginla, who I'm sure we'll talk about here in a little bit. 6 foot, 185-pound forward playing with Kelowna in the WHL. 62 games a year, 47 goals, 36 shots on, or 36 assists, and 307 shots on goal. So Derek, as I ask everybody, what makes Tij Iginla such an intriguing prospect?
There are two things that I'll talk about here. So I'll start off with something that's a little more tangible, I guess you could say, and that would be the shot and the scoring upside. Iginla just has a ton of upside as an NHL goal scorer. He already has a shot and goal scoring habits that are very, very pro-like, which probably wouldn't come as a surprise to many people, knowing that his dad is Tij Iginla. His dad
Jarome Iginla.
Jarome Iginla. Yeah. He's just a very, very dangerous shooter. His shot technique is really strong. His wrist shot, his one-timer, his backhander is very, very good. But he also has very good understanding of how to use it. Because sometimes you have players who are technically good shooters, but they have trouble, creating shooting opportunities for themselves or kind of opening enough space to, get a good shot off or getting to loose pucks. But Iginla has that's almost that sixth sense about it. He just knows how to work off his line mates. He knows how to anticipate plays, to pick up loose rebounds. And he also has the hands and the skating ability to kind of open up things for himself. He's very, very dedicated when it comes to driving to the net. He really likes to challenge defenders one-on-one to try and beat them, to open up a little bit more space, to get off that shot. And when you see the shot numbers, like you said earlier, he's getting a lot of opportunities for himself. Most of them are going in because he's such a talented shooter, but he's also generating a lot for himself and working off the teammates that he has. I mean, with Andrew Crystal there in Kelowna, he's got some support for playmaking, especially on the power play. But Iginla does a very, very good job of creating for himself. He's not someone who needs a quality playmaker around him to kind of play at the top end of his ability. The other thing that I would say about Iginla that makes him really special is more intangible, but there's almost like a swagger to him that it's hard to describe, but when you watch him play, you really see it. Just the way he carries himself, there's certain confidence and maturity that is very, very important to have at the NHL level, to be able to handle the pressure and the spotlight and the competition and, not kind of wilt under it. He already has that in spades. You can tell he's a guy who, is not just was raised by a Hall of Famer or future Hall of Famer in Jarome Iginla, but also a guy who's probably been around NHL players his whole life, talking to them, learning things about them. There's just something about the way he carries himself, as an athlete and as a player. You can just see the way he thinks out on the ice. He's thinking the game at a very, very high level. So there's this X factor about his mentality and his approach and his competitiveness and his drive that it makes him very, very special. He's just the type of player when you watch him and just kind of see his body language and see the way he reacts to situations. Like, there's no doubt at all that this guy just kind of gets what it means to be a professional hockey player, and is only going to keep getting better and better at that as he matures and develops and gains experience.
So, I mean, you mentioned his dad, and if you're been watching hockey for long enough, right? We're starting to get that cycle where you're starting to see these kids start to play. But Jarome Iginla for me was terrifying as a Sharks fan because he had that swag, he had that, like, all these traits you talk about. I'm just having flashbacks of having to play against Calgary in the playoffs and knowing Jarome Iginla could be a one-man wrecking crew for your team, as he has done to the Sharks. Granted, it was a while ago, but you're kind of getting flashbacks of like, oh, I could have that in my prospect pool. That sounds great. So, you talk about kind of the intangibles and stuff like that, but as he continues to grow and develop, what do you think is going to be that calling card? What is going to be that strength of his that's like, yes, this is what makes him that NHL player?
It's probably going to be a combination of the two things I described. So the scoring ability and just kind of the X factor of his mentality and his competitiveness. Like, he's going to be the type of guy who not only scores a lot of goals, but he's going to be the type of player who scores big goals. When
those
your
clutch,
team is,
I
mean, it's hard to confidently predict something like that. Yeah. But you can sort of see it. And if you understand much about like sports psychology, like there is stuff there that you can see in him, things like, getting into the zone and flow states and stuff like that. Like, you can see traces of that with Iginla that kind of project him to be that type of player. So the way I see him, the way I project him, is someone who not only scores a lot of goals in the NHL, but also scores a lot of big goals. The type of player who's consistent and can kind of bring up the energy and the intensity of the people around him. He's got a lot of natural leadership abilities. I wouldn't be surprised if he's the type of player who, eventually wears a letter on his sweater, maybe even as a team captain. He's not quite as physical as his dad was, but he certainly isn't afraid to play physical. He probably won't drop the gloves as much or anything like that, but he goes to the hard areas. He fights to get to the net. So he's very competitive in board battles and at the net front. So I think he's going to be a type of guy who just brings a lot of that offensive punch. And what's nice too is he's starting to grow more as a playmaker as well. His hands are really good. There are times when he can be a little, get a little bit of tunnel vision, try and do things too much himself. But there are a lot of strong elements there to his playmaking and to his ability to use his teammates. He just needs to refine them a little bit. So I could see him also becoming more of a well-rounded offensive threat down the road, as opposed to just a guy who's, only a sniper.
All right. So as he continues his development, what do you think is going to be the thing that he needs to continue to work on, or maybe the thing that might hold him back a little bit?
I would say just, using his teammates to kind of maximize what's going on in a shift. I watched a bunch of tape of his last night just to kind of give myself a recent refresher. And I saw a lot of individual work, and it wasn't all bad. Like, there were a lot of times where he was beating defenders one-on-one, driving to the net, kind of lowering his shoulder and making something happen. Getting the puck towards the net and generating chances. But there were times where it seemed like he was missing better opportunities. Turnovers were an issue at times, trying to do just a little too much. Maybe he beats one player or two player, but then tries to deke out the third and then coughs the puck up. So I would say maybe a little bit more of trusting his teammates more and having a little bit more peripheral vision with what's going on the ice. Now, I will say that Kelowna is not a particularly strong team this year. They don't have a lot of offensive depth, so I can sort of understand why he might feel inclined to do a little bit more himself, sometimes maybe too much. So I think that's something that might just naturally grow out of his game more once he's surrounded by better players and is just in kind of a different environment. But I think that would be the main thing. There were some issues at first with his skating. There's not so much issues, but I guess I should say like question marks about his ability to play with pace, his separation speed. But those have made a lot of progress this year. He's a lot quicker than he was. He's a lot more elusive and agile on his feet. So I wouldn't say that's a concern with him right now. He's not really like a pure burner or an especially beautiful skater or anything like that. But he's getting a lot better to the point where it's not going to be a concern or something that really holds him back.
All right. Before we continue with Derek. We talked more about Tij Iginla's strengths, or kind of where he would fit in with the Sharks. All that fun stuff. Just needs to take a quick break. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. Whether you're betting on the big upset or a one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines, and you can even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. All right, let's talk his timeline. So he is going to be in juniors for the next couple seasons. I would assume probably a season in the AHL to kind of just get used to playing pro hockey. And then when are we looking at a potential NHL impact?
I would say at least one more full year at the junior level, but he might be the type of guy who could skip the AHL. I mean, it's hard to guarantee that. But I think it's certainly a possibility with him. And the reason I say that is because his game has taken such big steps, not just throughout this season, but also compared to last year. Now, he was in a tough situation last year. He was on the Seattle Thunderbirds, who were a deep stacked team. So he didn't get a lot of ice time.
That was a very good team.
Yeah, that was a very, very, very good team. But just the progress he's been making throughout this season, especially, has been very, very impressive to me. It's shown a lot of ability to pick things up quickly and to grow his game and evolve it quickly. So I could see a situation where he has one more year in Kelowna. They should have a better team next year. They'll have Andrew Crystal back. He's forming some decent chemistry with his line mate, Hiroki Goisek, who will be back next year as well. So I could see a potential situation where Iginla has one more year in the dub and has a really, really big season. And that kind of propels him into the NHL the year after. But what's probably most likely is that in 2 seasons from now, he'll get that tryout in the NHL. You know, he's got the 9 games, and that'll probably be the deciding factor because he's probably going to get drafted by a rebuilding team. And they'll probably want to at least see how close he is. So it won't hurt them really to give him the 9-game tryout. And, you know, if he's ready, then great. I'm sure the fans will be very excited that he's ready that soon. But if not, you know, he'll go back to junior for one more year and, you know, he'll be fine. It's not going to hurt his development at all. And if he has to go to the AHL for a season as well, or half a season, that's fine as well. I mean, as we've seen this year in Dallas with Logan Stankoven, you know, tore up the WHL through the entire time, started this year in the AHL, tore it up, and just kind of used that as a springboard to go into the NHL. So I would say sometime in that range, but Iginla's going to be in the NHL sooner rather than later. That would be my overall prediction.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen with the Sharks, right? I mean, William Eklund spent basically an entire season in the AHL, and he's a better player for it, even though everybody, myself included, wanted to see William Eklund play on the Sharks. William Eklund's a better two-way player for it. Maybe not the production there because the Sharks team is they're bad, but you know, I can see the Sharks again. We've seen Mike Greer wanting to make sure that his prospects are over-ripened. So that's all his phrase, right? Over-ripened. So when they go to the NHL, they're not playing that bounce-back game where it's maybe you spend 2 weeks in the NHL, back in the NHL. If you're in the NHL, he wants you to be in the NHL. So if the Sharks do draft Iginla, where I don't know how, you know, we'll know how in depth, you know, the Sharks prospect profile or prospect pipeline, excuse me. But where would he fit? I would assume whoever the Sharks pick, if the first pick, if Iginla's the Penguins pick that we're hoping that we get, you have Will Smith, you have Quentin Musty. Are you kind of putting him up in that range with a guy like Quentin Musty?
I'd put him well above Musty. And this is coming from someone who does like Quentin Musty quite a lot, actually. You know, he's a guy that I really liked last year, and I like where the Sharks grabbed him. I thought that was a great pick. I would say he's a lot closer to Smith than Musty. And as much as I like Will Smith as well, I could see a scenario where Iginla would be the better NHLer long term. I don't know if I would say that yet. I'd probably go 60-40 Smith over Iginla. But Iginla is that good. I don't think he's necessarily showing up on a lot of the public draft lists quite as high as he should yet, because a lot of that progress has come throughout the season. A lot of places didn't even kind of view him as a first rounder early on in the year. That's only started to happen over the last few months. So I could see by the end of the season, he's pretty consistently top 15 across the board. And, I could see a scenario where it might even go as high as 5 or 6 if a team really, really likes him, just because the NHL upside, the NHL potential is that strong. And we've got a guy who, and the bloodlines. So we've got with Smith, Smith has a ceiling, let's say like a first line center, whereas Iginla would be like a first line winger, but could also be your captain, as a guy who's already very good on the penalty kill at the WHL level. So he could be a penalty killer at the NHL level. So might not score as many points in total as Smith, but might be a more well-rounded, complete two-way player. So, there's an argument to be made about which one of those would be more valuable, whereas Smith is, more of the pure offensive guy, although I think his defensive game isn't bad by any means, but I would say Iginla's more well-rounded overall.
All right. So if Iginla you kind of touched on it, but if Iginla does talk about his is very, very, very max, what type of player, I don't know if you want to do a comp, but what type of player do you think you would be getting with him?
I think you'd be getting at his ceiling, best case scenario, I'd say like a 40 goal, 70 point kind of power forward winger. And someone with leadership abilities. Yeah, it's not too bad at all. I'm trying to think of who that might be as like a really strong comparable now. There's not really a whole ton of guys exactly like that right now. Maybe like a Jamie Benn sort of player, where maybe not one of the most purely high scoring guys, although Ben did lead the NHL in points that one year with 89.
That one year, it's like,
I know that was the weird.
It's so
year.
Funny seeing that. It's like that's like half a season for McDavid.
And there's going to be like 30 guys this year that passed that or whatever. So I think Jamie Benn's probably the closest comparable I can think of. He's got the size, he's got the two-way game, he's got the physical element to him, the leadership. The really high-end scoring ability back when Ben was in his prime, whereas now he's more of a playmaker as he's aged. But I think that's sort of what you could expect out of Iginla as the best case scenario.
All right, before we finish up with Derek, we get to his thoughts on the 2024 NHL Draft. Just need to take a quick break. Passion, drive, and patience what brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. There are over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with the eBay Guarantee Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need, the price you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guarantee Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, let's shift to your thoughts on the 2024 draft. So we all know it's Macklin Celebrini's world and we're just living in it. But of course, the big question is that like kind of who's next, right? And last year it was very much like we knew it's Bedard. We know it's going to be some core, like we kind of knew 1 through 4 for a good, at least the names. This year it's kind of much different. So how are you kind of putting together at least maybe your top 5 here right now?
It's a good question. And, you ask 10 different scouts, you might get 10 different answers about how that shakes out. It's just kind of a weird year in that regard. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. There's a lot of players who've really kind of shown up this year as very, very good prospects. And I think the order they go in is going to kind of depend on what teams are looking for or what sort of players they kind of prioritize. Over at McKeen's Hockey, we've had Sam Dickinson in the number 2 spot for a little while now, and he's probably going to hold that down, although that might depend on what happens with the London Knights in the OHL playoffs. If he's great in the playoffs, he's going to cement himself in that spot probably. If he struggles in the playoffs, we might need to rethink things. But Dickinson has just so many tools, such a great profile, so much pure upside. He's one of the best skaters in the draft, forward or defenseman, but he's a defenseman. He's got great reach and size. The physical side of his game is still coming along, but it's there. He's really starting to learn the offensive side of things. He's at a point per game this year. Great shot and just creates so much with his skating ability. It's incredible just how much ice he can cover, how much he can open things up, whether he's driving the play or trailing it on the rush. Just the way he activates to make himself an option is incredible. The way he gaps up against opposing defensemen is incredible. And that's a huge skill to have in the NHL now with speedsters like McDavid and Nathan McKinnon. Like, you need to be able to skate really well to kind of contain those guys. And Dickinson can project as that sort of player. Ivan Demidov is great. He's just an offensive dynamo this year. I could certainly see him going top 5 just because the pure offensive skill is really high. Artem Levshunov is great as well. Just that big physical, kind of almost like freakish athlete defenseman at the university or Michigan State. Sorry. He's great. And teams always love big right shot defensemen. So I could see him in there. And then it gets harder to kind of narrow down a little bit. Anton Salayev is very, very appealing.
He's very tall.
He's very tall and he's a very great skater, but there's some concerns about the puck skill, the offensive upside. And yeah, it's hard to say exactly what that's going to look like in the NHL level. Like, I've seen comparisons to Victor Hedman, but he also might end up being like a Tyler Myers. So it's kind of hard to get a read on him still. Caden
the Sharks already have one of those. His name is Shakir Mukhamadullin, right? It's the very tall. We don't know what you're going to be, but you're really enticing to us.
And Russian too. So
in Russian, yes. So
and Caden Lindstrom is maybe the biggest wild card because when he was playing earlier this year,
he was awful.
He's phenomenal. Yes. He's incredible. Yes. He's got a lot of like almost like Evgeny Malkin to him, just the size and the skill and just, a little bit of like physical element there as well. Actually, Lindstrom's got a lot of physical element. So he was trending like sky high before he got hurt. So it'll be interesting to see what happens once he comes back, if he comes back in time for the playoffs. So he could go as high as 2 or 3, but maybe slip out of the top 5. Just because teams are a little less sure about him because they don't have as much of a book of work because he got hurt. So overall, I think the 2024 class is coming along really nicely. I don't think it's an especially strong or deep draft, but it's starting to win me over a lot throughout this year. I'm liking a lot of players more and more as the season's gone along. I think the top 15 is really strong. There's a lot of names I like throughout the second round. Maybe not a lot of what I would call first round talents that will seep into the second, but there's a lot of very, very solid prospects that are going to be there at least until the 60s or 70s. So the draft is coming along, and I think it might end up being a better one than the reputation that it currently has is.
Yeah, and I think too, like especially coming after the 2023 draft, which was so loaded, especially at the top end and talent, right? And it's just there's a reason why like Connor Bedard is like a generational player, and then Fantilli, who would be a first round pick in like 9 out of 10 drafts, or like all these guys, even like Will Smith is probably a first round pick in a lot of draft or like first overall picks. He's been over a lot of drafts, and you're kind of coming off of that. It's like, oh yeah, I guess this is like a normal draft this year, where it's like we do have a great player in Macklin Celebrini. There's a lot of intrigue, and Sharks fans are, hoping that we finally win the lottery this year and at least get something nice for all the suffering we've had to go through this year. But
that'd be a good get.
It would be a very good get. I mean, his dad works for the Warriors, the Boston University connection between Mike Greer, David Quinn. Like if the NHL is going to rig a draft, this is the year to do it. Nobody's going to question it. So come on, Bettman, do us a favor. But so if you're a team like the Sharks, right, you have your own first round pick, which is going to be probably top 2. You got a pick like the Penguins pick, which probably going to be 11 through 15. Then you're going to have 2 second round picks here. If things break right, it may not be the sexiest draft class, at least going into it, but if things break right, you could be walking away feeling really, really good about where the Sharks prospect pool is going, right? Especially if a guy maybe like Iginla does fall out of the top 10, or we'll start doing our second round, profiles soon. But like, there's a lot of good players still in this draft, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, like I was saying a minute ago, there's a lot of very, very good talent in the second round. And I don't always say that about a lot of drafts. You can kind of, there's always like a range as a scout where you start to get less interested in your own board. And, like for this year, like I love the top 15. It starts to get a little hairier around the late first where, I might not see as much like really high end talent in the late first as I would otherwise. But as far as the second round goes, and it's kind of knowing the overall general value of a second round pick, I think there's a lot of very, very good players that you could get out of the second round of the draft this year. They might not be like all-stars or franchise-changing players, but, maybe you get like a second-line center or a number 3 or a number 4 defenseman. Like there's a lot of players who have that kind of potential that are going to be still on the board into the 40s, 50s, or 60s, I would say.
And then just playing hypothetical here before we kind of finish up. Say you do get a Macklin Celebrini and you have a nice middle of the first round, second round pick, and you want a middle of the first round, second pick, and you want to maybe target a defenseman. Who are you leaning towards in that direction? Just, asking for a friend here.
in the middle?
Yeah.
The middle
kind of, 11 through 15 range.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Z Bullion is certainly a good option in that area. Some people think he might go a little bit higher than that. I think he might even go maybe a little bit lower than that. There's some differing opinions on him. But I think in like the 11 to 15 range, he'd be really, really good. There, you start to see a little
noted friend of Will Smith too. So
yeah, so you start to see kind of clustering sometimes. So a lot of the players that I like in that like 8 to 15 range are more so like forwards than defensemen. And then actually at the back end of the first, there's a bunch of big right shot defensemen who skate really well that are all very interesting. They're kind of like clustering together there. So, and I don't know if the 11 to 15 range would necessarily be the best place to look for a defenseman, but just for the sake of this episode, name I'll say is Carter Yakimchuk. I actually see him a lot here in Calgary because he plays for the Calgary Hitmen and I'm based out of Calgary. I also wouldn't be surprised if he goes a lot higher in the top 10 because he's another big right shot defenseman with a ton of offensive upside and he's got a lot of physical snarl to his game. But because there's a lot of good prospects that are going to be available from 5 to like 12, they're all kind of close. There is a chance that Yakimchuk might slide a little bit. So if the Sharks are picking, let's say 11 or 12, and hypothetically they get Celebrini first, I think that would be a player that they would want to like rush to the podium to get because he's been the number 1 defenseman for the Calgary Hitmen the last couple of seasons. And he's just so ridiculously good. From the offensive blue line in, I don't think there's a better player in this class aside from maybe Zane Parekh. Just the way he's able to create offense kind of out of nothing. He's always driving. He's so competitive. He's so driven. He hasn't let a really tough situation on a bad team kind of get him down this year. He's always playing.
That's good practice.
Yeah. Yeah. He's already used to playing like, every throwaway game in the middle of February is, like a game 7. So that's the type of thing that is good to have on a rebuilding team. So if Yakimchuk is available for the Sharks in that kind of range, I think that'd be a really good fit for them.
All right, we'll get to the last 2 questions. So 5 years from now, who's the best non-Macklin Celebrini player in this draft?
I would say Dickinson again, not just because he's number 2 on our board, but I just think that the ceiling on him is really, really high. And I think he's just going to kind of just take off in the next few years. I mean, the London Knights are a development factory. No one in the CHL develops prospects better than they do. And they've had a good track record recently with defensemen as well. You look at like how Evan Bouchard has come along for the Oilers as a great example. He's going to be on Hockey Canada's radar for the World Juniors. London is going to be a true title contender this year in OHL and probably again next year because they're going to be bringing back most of their team. So you've got a guy who's already got a ton of skill and his game is still a little bit raw, but he's going to be in so many great situations to refine it. He's going to be getting playoff experience. He's probably going to be playing for Hockey Canada at the World Juniors. And he's just in a great environment that knows how to develop prospects. So I think when you put all the ingredients together, just what you're going to see out of Sam Dickinson in the coming years, I think is going to be very, very impressive. And by the time he's like 24 or 25, I think he's going to be a superstar defenseman in the NHL.
Ooh, that's
bold,
big,
but
that's bold. But I like it. All right. And then as I ask everybody, all right, where does Tij Iginla go in the NHL draft? Give me a number.
An actual number?
An actual number.
8. I'm going to say 8.
Congrats, Buffalo. You got another defense. Or no, congrats, Buffalo. Not another defense, but I was just talking about Dickinson. Congrats, Buffalo. You drafted Iginla. That'd be really fun on Buffalo because they have so many skilled players to put him on there and just let him go ham with that. Derek, thank you so much for your time. Where can the people find you, buddy?
Twitter's the best place, or X or whatever it's called now. I'm always going to call it Twitter. My handle is at Derek_N_NHL. That's kind of the hub for everything, but articles that I write end up on McKeen's website. We're starting to branch out more into the multimedia side of things. So we're doing discussions about our draft rankings and other issues. So you can find us on Spotify, you can find us on YouTube, but all the links to all the fun stuff goes through the Twitter account. So that's usually the easiest place to go first.
All right. Thanks, buddy. I'm sure I'll have you back on here again. As long as you want to come back on, I'll have you back on again before the draft sometime. So thanks, buddy.
Yes, this is great. I'd love to.
All right, guys. Hope you enjoyed my conversation with Derek about Tij Iginla. Going to be very interesting, especially with this Penguins pick, kind of what happens there. But very interesting prospect. Would love him and Musty would just be really fun together. So we'll continue to have at least one of these a week until the off season, and then we'll kind of ramp it up from there. So make sure you guys are following wherever you get podcasts, and of course you can watch on YouTube as well. You can also follow the show on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Locked On Sharks. You can follow me on Twitter at MyFryhole. Until tomorrow, bye, friends.